Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. It's 7 o'clock now, but we thought we'd wait just another minute or two to make sure, give everybody a chance to get logged into the technology. So we will we'll start the meeting in just a minute. We're just giving everybody another minute to get logged in with the technology for those of you that just joined, and we will be started in just a minute. It looks like a bunch more people were able to log in, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. And Annalise Cohen from the NEA Foundation will get us kicked off in just a second, but I just wanted to go over a couple of logistical items. Tonight, we're only going to be using voice in our slide deck, so don't worry, you don't need to broadcast yourself on your webcam. We also will be keeping all of the attendees on mute for this evening. If you have a question or you want to chat something in, please feel free to use the question box. You can use that for questions or if you have a comment, and then at the end we may ask you to fill in an exit ticket. So you can just go ahead and use the question box that should be over to the right of your screen. Feel free to chat in any questions throughout the evening, and we'll try to catch up with those as the night goes on. And then just one final thing, I always want to let people know that we are recording this webinar. We understand that it's hard to get teachers together at one time, educators together at one time with our busy schedules, but we wanted to make this information available to everybody that's interested in Breakfast After the Bell and our NEA Foundation and Share Our Strengths No Kid Hungry campaign partnership and fellowship. So we will record this and then be sharing it out with others after this webinar so that they can have access to this information as well. So with that, I'll kick it over to Annalise Cohen from the NEA Foundation to tee us up for this evening.
Great, thanks so much, Bree. And I just want to thank you and Share Our Strengths for partnering with us on this exciting fellowship. We're so glad to be working together and to be offering this leadership and advocacy opportunity to NEA members. So just to give a little bit of information, so I have been working on breakfast in the classroom for a while, and Breakfast After the Bell for a while, and have really gotten to see educators are in a lot of places either the champion or can be the roadblock for getting a successful breakfast in the classroom program or Breakfast After the Bell program going. So the goal here is to really involve educators first and foremost so that they're equipped with the tools and resources needed. And as Scott Demaro, who is one of our huge champions for school breakfast, said, as a teacher and a parent, I know a nutritious breakfast sets the child up for success, provides structure, and helps contribute to the needs of the whole child. And really, that's one of the big reasons why the NEA Foundation is partnering on this work. We feel that a nutritious breakfast is an important building block to a student's educational success, and that as educators, we know hungry kids can't learn. So it's on all of us, if we see that there is a need in our classroom or in our school, to take initiative. And a lot of the times educators are on the front lines of hunger and are doing their part to ensure that kids have the snacks or nutrition they need. So with that, I will go over our agenda. So we're going to start with figuring out who's in the room. We're going to give an overview of what is the National School Breakfast Program. Then we're going to go into school breakfast and its connection to education. We're going to explain some of the innovative breakfast delivery models that are part of Breakfast After the Bell, give you some information about what you can do this week if you're interested in applying for the fellowship, and then we'll close it out with some questions and make sure you all leave feeling you have the information you need to hopefully apply. So with that, I'll pass it over to Bree.
Thanks so much, Annalise, for connecting all those dots and keying us up for the great webinar that we hope that everybody will experience tonight. So as Annalise mentioned, my name is Bree Doyle. I'm a senior manager of national partnerships on Share Our Strengths No Kid Hungry campaign, and I'll explain in a few minutes a little bit more about our organization and the No Kid Hungry campaign. I come to this work with about 15 years of experience in the education sector. I worked in the K-12 space for a number of years as a teacher and a specialist in rural, urban, and suburban settings across the country. And most recently, I worked at the University of Maryland in the teacher preparation programs and worked with both graduate and undergraduate students specifically in literacy preparation, and then also with students that were in our special education teacher preparation courses. And I also managed and worked on a number of federally funded education grants, working on research in predominantly literacy, but also worked in looking at best practices in alternative settings, best practices in classrooms where teachers were working with students from non-native English speaking backgrounds. And so I have a number of different experiences and lenses that I bring to this work. But when it comes to nutrition, my lens was pretty narrow coming to my work at Share Our Strengths No Kid Hungry campaign. I knew my hungry students couldn't learn, and so I did what I know a lot of teachers out there do, was go to Sam's Club or go to Costco or go to the grocery store and have snacks available to my students in the classroom. And they knew, I would know which kids needed a snack in the morning and direct them over to the door, and they would quietly get their snack and go about their business. What I didn't know anything about was the cafeteria, other than kind of my own experience with cafeteria as a student, and having some misconceptions about the food that was served there, the quality of the food, the nutritiousness of the food, and who could eat the food. And also, my experience with the cafeteria often was that I was called there when one of my students was misbehaving or there was some sort of behavior issue that needed to be dealt with, and I was called out of my prep for another course or class with another group of students and called down there to kind of deal with that. So I didn't always have the most positive view of the cafeteria. And coming to this work where I'm, working to empower education leaders to make sure that their students have access to the basic needs that we know that they need to be successful, I'm very wary of putting something else on an educator's plate. I know that we all have a million initiatives that we're asked to take on every year, and that we have to make really good informed decisions about what initiatives are best for our students and what can I put on my plate this year. So I really want to make sure that you have all the information you need to make decisions about whether or not this is the right fellowship opportunity for you. And I never thought about school nutrition as something that could help me in meeting my education goals for my students. So I've learned a lot in that and hoping to share with you kind of how I've changed my perspective on school nutrition tonight and through the fellowship this year. So Annalise, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So again, I'm Annalise Cohen with the NEA Foundation. I'm a program manager here. I mostly lead the foundation's school breakfast work, and I'm also involved in their Awards for Teaching Excellence program, which is a national recognition program that we put on in conjunction with NEA to award and to highlight the achievements of educators across the country. So working with educators is something that is really near and dear to my heart. I've been with NEA for the last 8 years, and I've been working with educators, local association leaders, unions across the country. So I've been very fortunate to get to see on a local, on a state, and on a national level what is going on as it relates to hunger, what's going on as it relates to union leadership and educator leadership. And I've been able to, in some contexts, through my graduate work, look at what's going on in other countries and how that compares to what we're doing in the U.S. and how we can learn from one another and expand on best practices and address issues like poverty that are problems everywhere in the world and certainly everywhere in our country. The perspectives I bring to this work is, as I said, I've been working with NEA for the past 8 years, but for the past 6 years, I've been involved in our nutrition initiatives around breakfast after the bell. I was also working on some issues around environmental health and as such mental health. And so I've gotten to see sort of how hunger and nutrition sort of intersect a lot of the other issues that sometimes come up in schools around discipline and behavior, and how sometimes really a lot of that is just could be kids acting out because they're hungry, and hunger is a real thing. Being hangry is something that happened to me today. So my passion really for being involved in this work is the fact that I feel that educator voice and leadership is really at the heart of what makes school initiatives successful. Without educator buy-in, without educator voice and leadership, I think it's a lot harder to get initiatives not only to be successful, but to continue after leadership changes. So I think getting our educators, whether they be classroom teachers, whether they be paraeducators, whether they be custodians or food service staff, engaged and involved in this work is important, not just for more kids to be fed, but for the program to continue far after the fellowship. So really happy to be working with Bree and share our strengths on this, and looking forward to sharing with you all more information about the fellowship. And I'll hand it back to Bree. Or Bree, do you want me to do the next slide?
I think, yeah, I'm looking here and I see that not everybody maybe logged into their computer and they're just listening by the phone, and that's totally fine. But if you are on your computer and you feel comfortable and you'd like to participate, go ahead and go into the question or the chat function on your screen, and you can respond by just telling us a little bit about who you are, maybe your district or in your position or your school site if you're comfortable. What's your perspective that you bring to this work, and what do you hope to take away tonight? So we'll just give about two or 3 minutes for folks to type that in. And if you don't have access to your computer, that's totally fine. Okay, we're going to move forward because I don't know that too many people have access to their computers tonight, so that's fine. But thank you for those that are able to join us. And like I said, if you joined later, we are recording this so that we can share it with colleagues that weren't able to make it tonight, so that they have the access to the information as well. So Annalise, you kind of started to talk about NEA Foundation, but if you wanted to pick up there, that would be great.
Sure. So the NEA Foundation was founded in 1969. We're actually going to be celebrating our 50th anniversary this year by the members of the NEA, and the foundation offers funding in the forms of grants and other resources to public school educators, their schools and districts to solve complex teaching and learning challenges. We have a couple of signature programs. One of them is Grants to Educators, which is as it sort of sounds, a grant program where we provide basically small grants around $2,000 and $5,000 to educators from pre-K through higher ed, and we award approximately $400,000 in grants yearly through that program. Then we also have a Global Learning Fellowship program, which is a global competency leadership opportunity for educators across the country to participate in a field study in a different country, to also learn different global competency skills that then they can go back to their classroom and share with their students. We also have, as I had mentioned, our Awards for Teaching Excellence program, which is our awards recognition program. And then last but not least is our Breakfast in the Classroom program, which I had mentioned before I run, and that's a program where we provide grants to schools and districts to help them upstart breakfast after the bell programs and to encourage more students to participate in the federal meals programs like school breakfast. So that's just a little bit about what we do, and I'll pass it back to Bree.
Thank you so much, Annalise. Now, I know most people are probably more familiar with NEA and the NEA Foundation, but maybe are less familiar with Share Our Strength and the No Kid Hungry campaign. So Share Our Strength is a national nonprofit that has been in existence for about 30 years. We were founded by a brother and a sister team that were really inspired to act in response to the Ethiopian famine crisis. And so for about the first 20 years of our existence, we really served as a grant maker in the anti-hunger community, so trying to end hunger by partnering and funding local nonprofits that were working in the anti-hunger space, and that was both internationally and domestically. About 10 years ago, we refocused our strategy to end childhood hunger in the United States, and we saw a real opportunity to maximize participation in the federal nutrition programs that are often or primarily served through schools. And so we saw that there's a lot of food and there are programs there to support students, but often school meal programs like school breakfast are being underutilized. And a lot of that is just due to when, where, and how meals are served. And also, I believe that a lot of adult problems stand in the way to kids accessing those meals. So we really work on ending childhood hunger through increasing access to meals. We also have a nutrition education program called Cooking Matters that works with families that may be receiving federal funding or federal meal, federal dollars to feed their families. And so we help them to use those dollars, maximize those dollars in the grocery store, and then teach them skills to prepare meals at home. And then we also do a lot of advocacy and awareness building around childhood hunger and helping people, empower people to act around that. So where's the intersection between, hunger and school and academics? Well, as Annalise mentioned, and I certainly had this experience today, I didn't have my breakfast, and so I was a little bit off. I was a little bit angry and, tired. I couldn't really focus on all of the work that I needed to do. And I know that we as educators have all seen that student in our classroom, and it doesn't matter. I've taught in schools that were in the poorest communities in America and the most affluent communities in America. And I had the experience of having hungry kids in my classroom that were off task or misbehaving or just couldn't learn or focus to the tasks of the day. So we know that there's a lot of research out there that talks about students that have access to food on a regular basis and that are secure in their food, they have better health. Their academics are better. They're able to think and learn better. But also their emotional and social well-being is much better than peers that don't have access to food. And we know, we don't have to tell you this, but we do have research that validates that 3 out of 4 educators across the country see students who are coming to school on a regular basis without enough food at home. And as a result, like I mentioned at the beginning, and I've talked to a lot of teachers across the country in the work that I do, and I would say that there's probably even more than 57% of teachers that are regularly buying students for food for students in their classrooms, whether that's paying for lunch in the cafeteria or bringing a lunch from home or just having snacks available to students. And we know that we're all spending a lot of money out of often our meager salaries to support our students, because we know how important it is that hungry students have access to food so they can make the most out of their school experience. So as an educator, I didn't know a lot about the school meal program. I certainly had misconceptions, as I mentioned at the beginning. And so in this next section, Annalise and I really want to make sure that we kind of dispel a lot of the misconceptions that we had coming to this work as educators, but we've also done a lot of work to ask teachers, ask principals, ask other professionals in school buildings, you know, what do you know about the school meal program, and what are your conceptions about it? And so this next section is just kind of a brief 101 based on a lot of the misconceptions that we hear across the country to educate you on those points. And so I'll turn it back to you, Annalise, for that.
Great. And I think we'll go to that Great Breakfast Changes Lives. So there's been some great data that has come out and some great information about the benefits of school breakfast. I would say school breakfast is one of the more researched interventions that has a tangible benefit to students' academic and overall success in school. And so in a study that Deloitte and Share Our Strength did, it was a social impact analysis. They showed that kids who eat breakfast at school overall miss about 1.5, or I'm sorry, they attend overall 1.5 more days of school per year. They also, on average, perform 17.5% higher on standardized math tests. And because of that missing less school, they're attending school, they're attending more school, they're doing better on their test scores. They're in turn 20% more likely to graduate high school. So a little thing like breakfast can go really a long way. And just so you're aware about what the job of school nutrition is and sometimes how hard it is, because I know we hear a lot from educators about why school meals look the way they do, and sometimes not always knowing, you know, what the nutritional value is in some of the items, because you know, they maybe don't know what all goes into making the meal. But right now, the school meal reimbursements for school breakfast, if the student qualifies for free meals, they don't have to pay anything, and that school will get back about $1.79 for that meal that child takes. Well, if they're a reduced paying student, you know, they only pay a small amount, and then the school district gets reimbursed back $1.49 for that meal. And then if they're a paying student, meaning they don't qualify for free or reduced meals, then they pay a certain amount, and then the school gets reimbursed about 31 cents. So overall, school nutrition does not have a lot of wiggle room for how much to spend for a breakfast meal, a reimbursable breakfast meal, and the components that make up a reimbursable breakfast right now from the USDA are a whole grain product, a cup of fruit or a whole fruit, and then a milk. And it can be I think they're just now going to be adding like 2% and 1% milk, and I think in some cases they can do chocolate milk. But those are the required components from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And a lot of the times, you know, we hear from school nutrition that, you know, they may be serving items like a donut or a Pop-Tart or something, but it is a whole grain donut or it is a whole grain Pop-Tart. So it doesn't necessarily on the surface look like it's healthier, but it's not the same food that you would find in your local grocery store. And I think it just goes to show sometimes how hard it is on the school nutrition side to make a reimbursable meal and meet all of the components while staying in budget, since they're not getting much reimbursement back for that meal. So that's probably more than you'll need to know about this, but I think it's good to just share some of the background, like Bree said, the 101.
Yeah, and I'll just add there too, Annalise, that a lot of times, you know, people might be confused with how the budgets operate. So a school nutrition department almost operates like a nonprofit under the umbrella of the school district. So the school nutrition department is providing meals for students in the district, and those students pay, like Annalise said, based on their family's income, a free, reduced, or a paid price. And then any meal that that is taken that is a reimbursable meal that has those components, the federal government reimburses the school district for the cost of that meal based on those rates that are there. If the school nutrition budget is healthy and isn't running at a deficit, then the school nutrition department won't compete with the general education fund in the school district that is for all of the things that you need to meet the students' academic needs. So I always like to just highlight that too, because sometimes, we know that our districts are often under like a very strict budget, or there may be budget shortfalls and things like that on the education side of it. So always want to just clarify that, it's helpful to have a lot of kids participating in school meals, because then the school nutrition budget will be healthier and less likely to be competitive with the education budget.
I think that's a great point. Thank you for adding that.
No worries.
And then in terms of the guidelines, this is again just like a little bit more about the sodium targets and the whole grain. So like I said before, the food that you see in schools and being served in schools isn't the same foods that you'll be able to buy in your grocery store. I know they sometimes look the same because the manufacturer is maybe the same. But because of the requirements that USDA sets for what each school meal has to have, like the calorie range and the saturated fat, the food items have to sort of fit within that set requirement. So these are that's just an overview. And then in terms of just understanding why we're doing this breakfast after the bell and not keeping breakfast in the cafeteria as it works in a lot of schools, is because nationally we're seeing that less than half of the kids that qualify for free and reduced price breakfast are actually eating it. And some of the reasons why that is because some kids may have extremely long commutes to school. I know in my area, some kids had about an hour to an hour and a half bus rides, and so they weren't getting to school early enough to be able to take advantage of breakfast in the morning. There's also, as you get into secondary school, with middle and high school, a stigma that if you go to the cafeteria, you're a poor, you're low income, and so a lot of kids, because they don't want to stand out and they want to fit in, they won't go. Also, sometimes depending on the size of the school or the layout, it may not be convenient. And I've heard that in some cases, like in elementary school, those smaller kids, like the kindergarten kids, might be afraid to go to the cafeteria if it's like all third graders or fourth graders or something. So I think sometimes that can prohibit kids from wanting to go in and enjoy that meal. And then socializing is more fun than eating. I think if you offer kids the option of playing outside or eating with their friends, they're 9 out of 10 times going to play with their friends. Older students may not be hungry in the morning, and then the reduced price meal may not be reduced enough for some students. They may not still have the money. So those are just some of the reasons why we feel that taking breakfast out of the cafeteria and moving it to the start of the school day in the classroom removes all those barriers and makes it just not one more thing the student has to do, but makes it more convenient for them.
Thanks, Annalise.
Yep.
So I really like this quote. Annalise shared this with us, and it's from one of the presidents of one of the NEA affiliates in Ohio that was doing a lot of work around school breakfast. And so she really talks about, students no longer being worried about their grumbling stomach, but now they're more focused on their schoolwork. And isn't that our hope for all of the students that come to school each day? And I really relate to that last slide that Annalise shared with us on some of the different reasons why kids may not be accessing breakfast. And I can certainly speak from my own experience in the schools where I taught. To be quite frank, I didn't really know whether or not breakfast was served. Often my contract prep hours were the first 30 or 45 minutes before the school day. So when I got to the building, I would go to my classroom and do my prep work or my planning for the day. And I wasn't really out roaming the building to know whether or not school breakfast was being served, to know whether or not students that I would have probably thought should have been going to breakfast, just knowing their family situation. I didn't know who was going to breakfast. It was just completely off my radar. And I know talking to teachers across the country that they share similar experiences. Last year, I had the opportunity to work with Wendy Turner, who was the Delaware Teacher of the Year in 2017. And she and I had met each other, and she was excited about, we piloted a similar fellowship program to this last year. And she emailed me and she said, I love working with you. I would love to do this, but my school's already serving free breakfast for all kids. So this isn't something that I need to do. And I said, okay, well, Wendy, please just go back and have a conversation with your school nutrition director or your cafeteria manager and find out how many kids in your building are actually eating breakfast. Because it might surprise you, even though you have free breakfast doesn't mean that all the kids are eating. And she came back the next day and she said, okay, I'm signed up for the fellowship. I think it was something under like 25%. Don't quote me on that number, but it was a very minimal number of students that were in her building that were eligible for free breakfast were actually eating breakfast each day. And so then she went and she actually sent me an iPhone video and she walked from where the buses dropped kids off and where parents dropped kids off to where the cafeteria was. And she said it's like a 5-minute walk or, a very long walk. And imagine if you're a kindergartner and you have, materials and a big heavy coat on, how would you ever get down to the cafeteria and then up to your classroom in time for the day? So I think, we're not always aware that breakfast is served. We're not always aware about the barriers that are there for students to access those programs that are eligible to them. But we hope that, whether or not you apply for this fellowship, that one of the things that you'll act on is just kind of going out and noticing, the beginning of the day and what kids are participating and who aren't, which kids are not participating and what might be some of those factors. And so coming to this work, we see that there is a big gap often between the kids that are eating breakfast and the kids that are not eating breakfast, just in sheer numbers. And then we can also drill down even further to think through, how many kids are eligible for free and reduced meals that may be very dependent on those meals, that are accessing the meal or not accessing the meals for whatever reasons, whether it's stigma or location and things like that. So we really see that food is that key to academic success, as we talked about. We really believe that, both at Share Our Strengths and at the NEA Foundation. We will talk about Maslow's needs in a minute. But we know kids are missing out on traditional meal programs. And we think that teachers and education leaders can be, contributing to those barriers in a school building. But just as much as we can kind of like implicitly be contributing to those barriers, we can become advocates for changing things in our schools so that kids can be, they can more easily find breakfast accessible to them. So just to go through some of this, what have we done? This is not just us working on assumptions here. We've worked really closely with teachers around the country. We've done focus groups and surveys and interviews. And in one survey that we did with teachers across the country, many of them were Teachers of the Year, we asked them in an open-ended way, what are some of your biggest concerns, or what are some of the biggest contributors you see to your students who are academically successful? And at the top of the list came up basic needs, food security, positive relationships with adults, feeling safe in school, social emotional learning, supportive school environment, much less about academics or teaching. Obviously those things are very connected, and I was an instructional specialist, so I very much believe in good instruction, but I also know that we have to have a positive learning environment for students that includes meeting all of their basic needs so that they can be ready to learn. Just as much as teachers across the country said there are all of these things that contribute to academic success, we also learned that there are a lot of barriers to success. And again, teachers talked about kids that are food insecure, who don't have access to basic needs, who feel unsafe in school. Those are the kids that will find the most barriers to academic success. So I know that most of the people here are probably relate to these findings, but I know as a teacher, sometimes I felt alone, feeling frustrated, and it was always helpful for me to hear that other teachers in other places, had similar thinking to me. So just wanted to share those with you, and that's really led us to how we're contextualizing this work. We also see that teachers have across the board said when kids, we see that kids say that when they participate in school meals, they have access to those school meals, they feel better, they have fewer headaches and fewer upset stomachs, they pay attention better, they have higher grades. Teachers also say the same things. We don't have the numbers there, but in surveys of teachers, they report these same findings. So as somebody that used to teach university courses, the first night of any of my education classes, I always talked about Maslow's needs. I know that many of you are very familiar with Maslow's needs. And at the base of that pyramid for Maslow's hierarchy of needs is, you know, we can't be self-actualized learners unless we have access to food, water, warmth, rest, all of those things that address our physiological needs. So food is right there. It is right on the foundation of our training as educators. Kids need access to food to become self-actualized learners. But right above that is that safety piece of the pyramid. And so I think that that's just as equally as important as thinking about physiological needs. If kids come to school and the only meal that they know they're going to get is lunch, then that is what they're going to focus on many times for students, is my next meal is lunch, and that is my only meal that I'm dependent on. When we can take some of that stress away by also making students feel secure that they're going to have access to breakfast or other meals, and it becomes part of their life. They feel secure in that, and that's letting them move up that Maslow's pyramid of needs. I also think that access to breakfast, and this is just not just me, but teachers across the country share with us that they see breakfast access as an equity issue. Just like if, you know, we make sure that students have access to school supplies in the classroom, because kids that don't have a pencil can't complete their math tasks or their writing tasks. Food is just as important to that. And I love this, you know, we've seen this picture a lot of times as educators where, you know, the equality is giving everybody the same little stepping stool so they could see over. We know how far that gets us. Equity is giving everybody exactly what they need to see over that fence. But liberation is just taking down that fence altogether. And for many of you, your districts may be participating in free meal, completely free, universal free programs, either through community eligibility provision, or the district may be offering free meals because they have high enough population in their district where they can make that financially viable. But just because, like I mentioned with Wendy's School, just because they're offering free meals to every student doesn't mean that every student is accessing those meals. And so it's our responsibility to kind of help make sure that kids have access to those meals in a way that makes the most sense and reduces barriers for them. A lot of teachers have talked about access to breakfast as related to response to intervention or to multi-tiered systems of support. So if we're looking at, you know, kind of the biggest bang for our buck and the lowest lift interventions that we're giving to students as a first pass, and breakfast can be available to all of our students, and it's a sustainable program through the USDA reimbursement program, why not try to put breakfast in place as an academic or behavioral intervention? And I'll just share with you, I'm working with a number of districts across the country, and in one of my districts, they moved towards piloting a breakfast after the bell program, a breakfast in the classroom program, and this school had they had a lot of tardies reported every day, a lot of absences reported every day, and also a lot of mid-morning nurse visits and behavioral referrals. And they had goals around chronic absenteeism and then also school climate. Within a few weeks of implementing, or probably even shorter than a few weeks of implementing breakfast in the classroom, their tardies went down from 50 to under 7 a day. Their absentee rate went down by half. And then I think their behavioral referrals went down from like about 10 mid-morning most days to about 0 to 1. So, you know, that's just one story. That's not going to be the same case everywhere, but that to me says this is a good intervention, a good first pass intervention under multi-tiered systems of support or RTI. We've also heard in some other districts where if they're doing a more kind of nuanced MTSS model where they're doing a lot of small group interventions, that they find having school breakfast as part of those small group interventions to be a really great way to kind of build community in those groups. We also hear from a lot of our great teacher champions that they see a really important connection to the social emotional learning initiatives going on in their districts. I know one of our teacher fellows from last year kind of helped to restructure the day in his building where they had kind of team up, like team meetings with different groups, and they were able to have a visual as soon as they walked into those meetings to see which kids were eating breakfast and which kids weren't, because every kid has access to breakfast. And for that teacher, and I've heard this from other teachers too, they say, okay, so I see that child is not eating breakfast this morning. That's the first kid I'm going to go emotionally check in with and make sure that they're doing okay. Maybe they just ate at home. Maybe something's going on, but it's a good, quick visual reminder for me to go check in with that student first. We've also heard that it's a great way to incorporate breakfast into like positive talk lessons or just relationship skills lessons. It's a really natural fit for actual social emotional learning lessons as well. So again,
Great.
Please feel free to, yes.
Oh, no, Bree, you keep going.
Oh, okay. Feel free to chat in any questions as you go, but I just wanted to give a quick overview of a couple of the different models, and then I want to turn it over to Angela Homan, who we're lucky enough to have join us tonight. She's one of our teacher fellows from last year and a superstar champion for school breakfast in general, and I'll turn it over to her in a minute, but there are a number of different models that we kind of have really good evidence for working, and we've seen teachers adjust these to make it work best in their school. But our goal is to make breakfast the most easily accessible for students. And so we think that when you can make breakfast part of the school day, just like lunch, and have nothing else competing with it, that the most students will participate. We also think that if you're making breakfast part of the school day and in the classroom through whichever model is delivered, that it can be really closely tied to instruction, and that instead of losing instruction time by adding this into the classroom, we see teachers actually adding instructional time. So there's a couple of different models that we talk about. Breakfast in the classroom, where breakfast is delivered to the classroom and students eat it in the classroom during instructional time. And we see that on average, when that model is implemented, that we see about 88% of students participating compared to just 50% in the traditional cafeteria model before the school day. Second Chance is a model that works really well in schools with early start times, traditionally middle or high school, although if you're in my area, they've reversed and the elementary schools are going earlier and the middle and the high schools are going a little bit later. I know because I pass a bunch of them on my way to work every morning, so I've learned their commute schedule. But Second Chance Breakfast is opening the cafeteria or opening up some kiosks between first and second period or mid-morning so that kids that may not have been hungry before the school day started or when breakfast was served before school, they're able to grab something and sustain them until lunch. And then Grab and Go to the classroom is similar to breakfast in the classroom, where kids are allowed to eat during instructional time, the first 10 to 15 minutes of that school day. But they're able to access breakfast kind of on their way to class, whether it's through some carts or kiosks or walking through the cafeteria and grabbing a little bag that has that reimbursable meal there. So Annalise, did you have something that you wanted to throw in there?
No, I think that was great, and I think that it was a good overview of all the different options. So
awesome. Well, I think we'll there's some more information that we just found, again, from teachers that just generally there's a lack of awareness about school breakfast, a lack of awareness about whether or not students are eating breakfast in their schools. But we learn from teachers, whether it's through fellowship projects or surveys or just being out in the community, that teachers, when they learn about the program, they're like, well, yeah, I want to be part of the solution. So enough of us talking, and I want to turn it over to one of my favorite people in the world, Angela Homan. And Angela, I would love for you to just kind of give a little overview of what brought you to this work and, what are some of your big lessons that you learned and where are you going next with it? Are you on? Let's see. I might need to unmute you. Hold on. Oh, Angela, are you there?
I am here.
Can everybody on the line hear Angela? Can you hear her, Annalise?
I can hear her.
Okay, go for it.
All right. I am Angela Homan. I am a fourth grade teacher in a rural school district in central Pennsylvania. And my building is between 40 and 50% free and reduced lunch. And prior to my work, we were serving a traditional breakfast in the cafeteria. And I thought everything was just great. And I didn't need to do anything to change. I actually went to a breakfast informational session about breakfast after the bell last summer. Not the one that just happened, and as I was sitting there, I realized that I had missed something in my classroom. One of my students had quit eating breakfast. And as I listened to the information, I realized that she was choosing to be social with her peers instead of taking care of her hunger needs. And I vowed that wouldn't happen anymore. So as you see on the slide, I met with my principal and he allowed me to start a pilot program. And I went to somewhere around 70% of my students eating breakfast in the classroom. I allowed them to pack a breakfast or purchase a school breakfast. In our statistics, I only counted the children who bought a school breakfast. I immediately saw we became a closer community in the classroom. The day wasn't started divided with some of them in the cafeteria and some of them with me. The children on a webinar that we have with another class told the other class that the best thing about our school was that they could eat breakfast in the classroom. So they became my cheerleaders as well. But I realized that I had that one student who inspired me to change because I was missing her need. And I realized that other classrooms had the same need. So I asked other teachers in my district to pilot with the principal's support. And we had about 7 pilots last year. And now my building and another building in our district are going totally breakfast after the bell and having great results. I'll give you one tidbit from this year. The first week of school, I had between 1 and 3 children go to traditional breakfast. As soon as I went to breakfast after the bell, the second week of school, I went to 12 to 15 students in my room eating, and I have 19 students. One problem that I had in my district, and this probably happens to the rest of you as well, is that instructional minutes really matter to my administrators. And starting something like this sounds like you're going to lose instructional minutes, but I don't. I do a read aloud to my 4th graders every morning, and those who aren't eating breakfast are just sitting there listening to the book. And those who are eating breakfast are sitting there listening to the book. So we have an extra 15 minutes of language arts, and I get to go back to doing one of my favorite things every day is read to my students. Those who are not eating will use their iPads and look up new words in our text. So we get great discussion going on. They usually beg me to read longer, but it's not the breakfast need that we're taking care of, it's the literature need. So I'm very excited about the changes and watching it happen in the rest of my school district. Anything else you wanted me to mention, Bree?
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. Angela, I was wondering if you wanted to share, and Angela was also part of a pilot fellowship project that we did last year, and if you wanted to speak, in a minute or two to just kind of the value of being in fellowship with other educators across the country leading this work as well.
Sure. As we go to a full school rollout, probably my biggest resistors were the kindergarten teachers. And I was able to reach out to one of my other fellows, Lisa, who was a kindergarten teacher, and she could help me talk about how to problem solve their issues. And that helped us to have a smoother rollout with kindergarten. I also learned from my other fellows that it's developing your network of those key people in your school district. For me, the nutrition director jumped on board right away, but I missed the actual person who did it, who was the cafeteria worker, and she would run back to the cafeteria manager and she would complain, and then I'd get an email, and I finally learned to just walk down the hall and talk to her, and we cut out a whole piece that wasn't working because, as I heard the other fellows, it's the communication that's so important.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Angela. I know you had a busy night tonight, and so we appreciate you jumping on. And I think that I really appreciate you highlighting your leadership skills that you developed through this, the advocacy platform that you've kind of taken in your district and statewide, and also the importance of being with other educators to troubleshoot. And so I think that that's really something that we hope that anybody that wants to be part of this fellowship is that, we're really invested in kids accessing breakfast and having that access to breakfast to be successful academically, but also we're passionate educators, both Annalise and I and Angela, and we want educators to feel that they're able to develop professionally here through their leadership skills, their advocacy skills, and then their ability to network with other educators across the country too. So thank you so much for sharing, Angela.
You're welcome.
So I think we'll move on to just talking about some things that you can do this week. So Angela, started by saying, and you saw in her email, she went back and she made some observations in her building, and she said, I know this student's not eating, what can I do? And she connected with school nutrition and cafeteria staff. She talked to her school principal. I remember one of the fellows that we worked with last year said he went to his cafeteria manager and said, I want to help you improve breakfast. And she broke down crying because she said, I wanted to improve breakfast and I wanted to have a partner, a teacher partner to do this. I'm so happy you're here. When can we start? So just really building those bridges between school nutrition and the education side of the building. I know that I never made a big effort with my cafeteria staff, and I wish that I had now. So those are some things. Like Wendy Turner did. You can ask about the data. How many kids are eating breakfast in this building? And I'm going to walk the halls this morning and see how hard it would be for me as a kindergartner to get to the cafeteria in time to eat breakfast. You can take Angela's advice and volunteer to start a pilot in your classroom. There was a no-cost way that she did it. She said, I just want to see if this works. I'm going to see what happens if I take my kids to the cafeteria and we bring the food up to the classroom and eat there. And if it works, great. Let's keep it going. If not, then we'll think of something else. We also have data to suggest that just nudging your students to go to the cafeteria and eat breakfast, even if you're not moving to an after the bell model, an adult nudging a student to eat breakfast yields higher participation in the building. So that's a really low-lift way that you can encourage students in your building. And encourage parents. We know the power of parent participation in everything that we're doing as educators. So educating parents about the nutritional value of meals, educating them that the meals are available, helping them to access paperwork, or if your school is not collecting paperwork because they're working under CEP, educating them to let them know they don't need to submit that paperwork. So here, the big thing that we hope that you'll do out of this webinar, and Annalise, feel free to jump in, but we hope that you'll apply for our No Kid Hungry and NEA Foundation Breakfast After the Bell Fellowship. And so as we've alluded to, we're looking for educators that are NEA members to implement a Breakfast After the Bell program in their schools. And we encourage you to start small with a classroom and expanding it past to like your grade band or, to a wing of the building or whatever that is. But we want to, end with implementation school-wide. Part of this project, and, we'll guide you and bring in experts to kind of help this along, is to make a plan to expand Breakfast After the Bell by building awareness, building bridges between education staff and nutrition staff, and becoming an advocate for your students. So we want to develop teacher leadership skills around something that often doesn't seem like a supernatural fit to teacher leadership skills, school nutrition, but developing those teacher leadership skills through doing these things, including reporting on your work through conference proposals or a written piece in a newsletter, empowering other teacher leaders in your district, educator leaders across your district as well. And then working, if you're interested, on some advocacy work. So can you engage some elected or district officials to come to your school site and see the power of your Breakfast After the Bell program? How else can you engage educators in your community to be aware of the access to basic needs in their schools? Annalise, do you want to talk about this slide?
Sure. So as Bree was saying, we would love for you to consider applying for the No Kid Hungry Breakfast After the Bell Fellowship. Some easy ways to start is to observe how breakfast is served in your school and think as you're observing what you could do to remove some barriers that you see. And also think about for some schools, like where a lot of your discipline issues happen. I know with some schools that we funded in the past, like a middle school, for example, that we funded, they had more than like 20 behavioral referrals in the morning, and once they started serving breakfast after the bell and in the classroom, those behavioral referrals went away. So it can look at where some of the maybe problems are too in the morning, and how possibly moving breakfast could help in some ways fix or lessen those issues. And then also meeting with your school nutrition director or cafeteria manager, your building administrator, your local association president. You know, we really feel that this can be something that the union or association takes a really positive stance on, and it's a way to engage your members, like your fellow members in your school district, about what changes they want to see that need to take place. As you're talking with these folks, you can discuss what equipment or funding you might need to make those changes, because as we've noted, you can get a school-based grant up to $3,000 from Share Our Strengths to help buy some supplies, whether it be cleaning supplies, whether it be kiosks, whether it be coolers. You know, really it's what your school needs. And then of course, apply. We want to see educators applying for this, and we want to see you making a difference for your students by getting them more school breakfast.
Awesome. So our fellowship will occur this year. We hope to have a kickoff meeting at the end of October, early November, depending on applicants' availability, with, you know, using this fall to really kind of build community and build momentum in your building, with an idea of implementing, you know, piloting when you come back from the winter holiday and into the spring. We'd love to see people implement by April and have a few weeks, at least a few months of implementation and opportunity to scale up into their building. We will have a kickoff meeting in person, then an ongoing webinars monthly and as needed, based on fellows' desires, to create that fellowship community and develop those leadership and advocacy skills as well. So our application is due, it's live, it's due on October 8th, and everybody will receive a follow-up email to this webinar with the recording to the webinar that you can feel free to share with others, as well as information about applying to the fellowship. So that will go out tomorrow. We hope that you'll get that, but we're accepting applications now. We really encourage you to speak with your school nutrition team, go through that application before you start, because you will need some data and also some letters of support from your local education association president, your school building administrator, and then your school nutrition director. And that's really just to make sure that conversations have happened and that everybody is supportive on the front end of the application. So I think we'll stop there. I know not everybody's logged in, so they can't necessarily type in questions, but we'll stay on the line for a few more minutes to answer any questions that you can put into the chat box. And while folks might be doing that, I'll just make sure that our contact information is up here. So if you have any kind of technical questions about the application, feel free to email fellows@strength.org or call the number that's listed there. Or you can feel free to reach out either directly to Annalise or myself, and our contact information is listed there as well. So I see we have a question: does a teacher have to apply, or can a cafeteria manager apply? The person that's filling out the application, we would like to be an NEA member. So whoever that is, we would love to see the NEA member kind of taking the lead on this work. If you're both members of NEA, then I think you could submit a co-application, and feel free to reach out to us to kind of help you think that through. But we really see, even if the NEA member or the teacher, the paraeducator, whoever that NEA member is that's applying for the fellowship in the application, we really see them working in concert with their school nutrition staff on this project as well.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I know in some of our districts we represent school food service professionals. So if you're an education support professional, food service professional, you're definitely still eligible to apply. And I think that's one of the nice things about this fellowship, is because NEA membership is not just classroom teachers, but support staff as well. We want to encourage support staff to get involved in this leadership opportunity and help you to, either get that support from those classroom teachers or figure out, through our other fellows like Angela, that have gone through this with Share Our Strengths, what you can do to make sure that you feel supported as you move the application and the program forward.
I don't see any other questions that have come in, and I know it's 8 o'clock now and people need to get to their lesson plans or to their dinner or to whatever that is. We're so thankful for you all taking the time to join us tonight. And, Annalise and I are both very happy to stay on for a few more minutes. And we are excited for your applications to come in, we hope. So thank you so much, and we hope to see some great applications coming. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.